Hi, I'm Gareth Green, and in this video we're going to discover how you can spruce up a piece of music by using one simple technique, the secondary dominant. Now, we've got other videos out there on the channel which explain secondary dominants and what they are, but a few people have very reasonably written to me to say, well, you know what, thanks for the video, I now understand what a secondary dominant is, but how do you use it? And where would I use it? Or I've been writing a piece of music and I can't see where you might put one of these in. So this video is really showing us how to use a secondary dominant to replace something that might feel just a little bit more kind of plain, less adventurous, if you like. And then you've got the option to use it or not to use it. Quite often you might be writing a piece of music where you've got some kind of theme that comes around and then it comes back later on and you're thinking, shall I just do exactly the same thing again? Or can I vary it in some way? Well, one way you can vary it is to use secondary dominants. So quick recap on, well, what's a secondary dominant when it's at home? Okay, I'm in a key and I decide that I want to go chord 5 followed by chord 1, a dominant chord followed by a tonic chord in a different key, and then carry on in the original key. Okay, well that sounds like a bit of a novel idea, doesn't it? But can I just do that in any old key? All right, so I'm in G major, which is the key we're going to be working in today. And then I think, oh, I'll tell you what, I'll go 5-1 in D flat major. And then carry on in G major. Well, does that sound good? Not really. Doesn't really work because that 5-1 in D flat major is a total shock to the system. So here's the trick. When you use a secondary dominant, you can go 5 followed by 1 in some other key, but the 1 in this other key should be a chord in your prevailing key. Okay, so if we're in G major, well, chord 1 is G, B, D, isn't it? Okay, now I can't put a secondary dominant in G because I'm already in G. So if I go 5-1 in G, all I'm doing is staying in the same key. So it's not a secondary dominant, if you like, it's a primary dominant, isn't it? But chord 2 in G major is A, C, E. So that while that's chord 2 in G major, it's also chord 1 in A minor. So what it means is if I'm diddling along in G major quite happily, minding my own business, and then I've suddenly got a chord of A minor. If I could go 5 followed by 1 in A minor, that would be a secondary dominant in A minor. But because I've gone 5 or 5-7 in A minor, followed by 1 in A minor, I can then carry on in G major and it all flows quite nicely. So it doesn't do what that D flat major example did and suddenly shoot you to another key from nowhere. You see it's quite a smooth transition because I've given us a bit of colour by going 5 or 5-7 to 1 in A minor. But because 1 in A minor is 2 in G major, I just carry on in G major as if nothing's happened. And it sounds pretty cool. Okay, well, what are my other options? Well, chord 3 in G major is a B minor chord. So what that means is that I could be in G major and be quite happily tootling along in G major. And then I could go 5 or 5-7 to 1 in B minor. And then carry on in G major. And it sounds absolutely fine. So that's using a secondary dominant in relation to chord 3. So in the textbooks, when they explain this sort of stuff, you often see people talking about things like 5 of 2 or 5 of 3 or 5 of 4. This is what it's talking about. It just sounds a little bit confusing, doesn't it, when you see it like that? Okay, let's move on. So chord 4 in G major is C, E, G. But C, E, G is also chord 1 in C major. So it means that I could be in G major, happily going along, and then I go 5-7 or 5 to 1 in C major. And then I say, well, it's 1 in C major, but it's 4 in G. So let's carry on in G. So there's another possibility. Chord 5 is a D major chord, D, F sharp, A. So obviously, apart from being chord 5 in G, It's also chord 1 in D. Okay, so here I am in G major. And then I go 5 or 5, 7 to 1 in D major. And then I carry on in G major. And all is well with the world. Okay, then the next chord is chord 6 in G major. Well, what's E, G, B? That's chord 1 in E minor, isn't it? So here I am in G major, and then I'm going to go 5 or 5, 7 to 1 in E minor, and then carry on in G major. So that works quite nicely as well, doesn't it? Chord 7 is not such a useful chord because F sharp A C, that's a diminished chord, so it's not the tonic chord of anything. So you can't do a secondary dominant using chord 7 when you're in a major key. Now, obviously, you've got exactly the same thing that you could do with a minor key as well. But instead of having to remember, oh, am I allowed to do a secondary dominant in this key, that key, or the other key? All you need to do is what I've just done, is to say, well, here are my G major chords, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7's no use to us because it's diminished, but all the other chords are major or minor. 1, I'm already in that key, so forget it. 2 gives me a possible secondary dominant in A minor. 3 gives me a secondary dominant in B minor. 4 gives me a secondary dominant in C major. 5 gives me a secondary dominant in D major. 6 gives me a secondary dominant in E minor. So you now have all your secondary dominant possibilities. All right, well, let's have a look at this bit of music that I've written that's on the screen. Now, there's two versions of this. There's the first stave, which is the original piece, if you like. And then on the second stave, I've highlighted in red where I've done something using this secondary dominant technique. So first of all, let's have a listen to what's on the top level of this thing, which is 2 4-bar phrases not using secondary dominants. Now, it doesn't matter which style you're writing in. I can't help the fact that I was brought up to be a church organist, so it sort of sounds a bit like that. You might be in a rock band thinking, why would you want to do that? That's fine. Put some rhythm in it, speed it up, do something with it, and it will suddenly become in a different style quite easily. But the point is, it's still the same language. That's the great thing. So there we are. We've got 2 phrases of G major where every single chord belongs to the key of G major. You know, we're going 1, 5, 7, 6, 3, 4, and so on. We've got chords in G major. All right, now have a listen to my second version of this, in particular taking notice of the notes in red, where we are applying a secondary dominant principle. And if you're puzzled by the first one, panic not, all will be revealed. So here's the second version. Now, it's recognizable as the same piece of music, isn't it? But you can hear those differences. Might be helpful if I just play the 2 versions back to back. Here's the first version, followed by the second version. Well, they almost sound the same. It's the same melody. Most of the harmony is exactly the same, but there's a little bit more spice, a little bit more color in the second version because of the secondary dominants. Okay, well, let's start looking at some of these. I'm going to come back to the first one later, if I may, because there's something particular to say about that. But let's have a look at this one. Okay, now if we have a look at this, this is a secondary dominant in which I'm doing what exactly? I am going from 5/7, and it's in its last inversion, so 5/7D, to 1 in its first inversion in the key of C major. Okay, so that's what's going on there. I'm purposely doing things in different inversions because you don't have to be in root position. So it's just to show that that possibility exists. And also, of course, by doing that, you can see that I'm preserving the original bass line because this F sharp has simply become an F natural, hasn't it? But you can see what we're doing here. We've gone from 5/7D in the key of C to 1 in the key of C, 1B, 1 first inversion. And this C major chord is chord 4 in the home key of G major. So it's one of the things that we can do in this key. Now, one thing I'm trying to show you here as well, just trying to pack as much as we can into a single video here, is that you don't have to have a secondary dominant, then go immediately back to the original key and carry on for another half an hour before you produce another one. There's nothing to say that you couldn't put them back to back. Well, that's what I've tried to do here. So what's going on here? Well, I've used a 5/7 in its last inversion, a 5/7D, followed by a 1 in its first inversion, a 1B, this time in the key of A minor. Okay, so let's have a look and see how that's happened. So when we look at this chord, we can see we've got 5/7D, the dominant 7th in A minor, last inversion, and I'm following that with A minor, first inversion. Now, why am I sort of doing this thing with inversions? Well, partly here, you might notice what I'm sort of doing is making this little corner a little bit sequential. We've gone 5/7 in its last inversion to 1B in one key. Oh, then we're going 5/7 last inversion to 1 in first inversion in another key. So harmonically, that's making a nice little sequence, isn't it? If you use 7th chords, they tend to be stronger than just using the dominant chord. You can see you could have just used a G major chord here, couldn't you? But actually, if you just use a G major chord, well, is it chord 5 in C or is it chord 1 in G? We don't really know. If you throw in the 7th and make it a 5/7, that F natural in this case is really defining it as a chord in C major. So the 7th, I think, is very useful. You don't have to use the 7th, but if you do, you really help to confirm the new key. Otherwise, it's not really obvious that you've used a secondary dominant in many cases. Okay, and obviously I'm doing the same thing in the next one. When you use the 7th, a dominant 7th in particular, we've got some voice leading issues to think about. So the 7th is supposed to fall by step, which is what it's done here. So if the 7th is in the bass, so it's the last inversion of a 5/7, it will have to fall by a step, so it's going to give you the first inversion of the tonic. So you've got to think, oh, 7th needs to fall by a step. The 3rd is supposed to rise by a step. Well, it does there, doesn't it? B going to C, and here it's in the tenor, G sharp going to A. So you've got to think about the voice leading issues that come out of this. But this is showing you can have a secondary dominant in any of the keys that are presented by the chords of the original key. You can have them as one-offs, or you can put them back to back if that works, as it does in this case. You don't have to do this in root position. You can do it in some other inversion. So you can see the impact on this second phrase of using the secondary dominants. The original second phrase, quite like that. Here's the revised second phrase. Well, whether you prefer it or not, that's entirely up to you, but you can hear it's a bit richer with those secondary dominants in. Okay, now I said I was going to leave the first one to last because I had a reason for doing that. Well, you might already have spotted there's something a little bit different going on here, because what am I doing here? Well, I've got a 1 in the key of E minor. But what I'm using just before it is not a 5 or a 5/7, but I'm using a diminished seventh. So diminished seventh followed by a 1, this time in the key of E minor. I could easily have made it a 5/7, as I've done with the later secondary dominants. So had we just had a B in the tenor instead of that C, well, fine, it would have been a 5/7 in first inversion, going to chord 1 in root position this time. Why is it having to do that? Well, if this were to be a 5/7 in first inversion, that D sharp would need to rise in the bass and the 7th would need to fall. So we're thinking about voice leading again. Now, if you're sort of thinking, yeah, well, I quite like the idea of a secondary dominant, but is there any way I could spruce up that dominant chord? Do I have to use 5/7? Well, you could use 5, but as I say, 5/7 is often a stronger chord to use. But you might also want to consider what I've done here, which is instead of using a 5/7 chord, you replace it with a diminished 7th chord that belongs to the key of the following note. So we're saying that this is a tonic chord of E minor. It's chord 6 in the original G major, but it's chord 1 in E minor. And this first chord here is a diminished 7th in the key of E minor. How do I know that? Well, build your diminished 7th on chord 7 of the key. So if I'm in E minor, chord 7 is D sharp, F sharp, A. Stick an extra minor third on the top of it, you get C. So that's a diminished 7th chord in the key of E minor. So instead of using the dominant 7th, you can hear that B in the tenor, I've gone for a C. It makes the chord a bit more intense. So now I've got a resolution from there to the tonic. So I could have gone 5/7 to 1 or 5/7 first inversion to 1, but I've gone for a diminished 7th to 1. So it's a little embellishment of the secondary dominant idea. So I'm hoping this is just a very practical session saying, actually, are we happy about secondary dominants, when you can use them, when you can't? And if we were in a real situation with a piece of music, how do we actually put them in there? So you might get to the point where you can just put them in straight away, or you might get to the point where you've kind of written your version of this, and then you're thinking, how can I kind of do something with that? And then you think, aha, secondary dominant possibilities exist. So why don't I go for that? So here we are again, the original. Now with secondary dominants. Well, I hope you found that video helpful, and if you have, you might like to go to our website www.mmcourses.co.uk. When you get there, you could click on courses, and that will give you access to all of our courses on harmony, on oral work, orchestration, keyboard harmony, heaps of things out there, analysis, all sorts of resources that you might find helpful as a follow-up to this video. While you're on the homepage, have a click on Maestros as well. We've got 3 levels of Maestros. Level 1 is a kind of support level, but comes with various exciting perks. Level 2 comes with those same perks, but also gives you access to a monthly live stream where I kind of inject a good hour of solid teaching every month, and there's a live chat running so people can ask their questions. Members can request topics that they'd like me to cover. Great stuff, and a lovely supportive group of people. And then we've got level 3, which gives you access to everything that I've already mentioned, and a second live stream each month where you can submit your own work, composition, harmony, performance recordings, whatever you want to do. I'll give you personal evaluation. We'll share that in the group. Again, there's a live chat running. People can ask questions. We learn from each other. And it's a fantastic global community of musicians that are really supportive of each other and really value the time that we spend together. And if you're a level 3 member, you also get discounts off our courses. So how about that? So have a look at what's on the website and see what is helpful to you.